There we go. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's get started. For the new people here, the way it usually works is I do a presentation, but I pause periodically to take on questions about what I've covered up to that point, and I usually subdivide it into a bunch of smaller topics. And at the end of those, we have a little discussion if there's interest in that. And toward the end, we open it up to just anything that doesn't fit into any of the subtopics we talked about earlier. Um, okay, so yeah, the topic today is causation or causality. You sometimes hear those two words. They're, in the philosophy literature, they're pretty much interchangeable, the way it's used. Um, and what the order of things that I want to talk about today are, I'm going to start out, well, I'm going to follow at least partially the pattern that Marianne Talbot does in her lectures that I put a link to. Um, but toward the end, I'm going to deviate from that a bit. But the first thing that we need to talk about is why causation matters. What's the point of it? I mean, is it important, and why is it important? And um, and then later we're going to be talking about some issues that are related to causation, such as what's its connection to determinism and free will, for example. But before we even get there, what are the different theories of causation? There's at least three or four of them, starting with the classic one of David Hume, which is called regularity theory. And even though it's centuries old, it still is uh, one of the dominant theories that hasn't been disproven. And there are alternative theories, but either if you look at them closely, they're not that different from Hume's, or if they are different, well, we'll talk about that later. They're still uh, experimental, I guess, insofar as philosophy can be experimental. Um, anyway, so what it what is okay? Why is causation important? I think Marianne Talbot gives a nice introduction to this. There are three. She gives three reasons why the idea, the concept of causation is important to understand. One of them is that we use causality or causation in explanations of things. When we're trying to explain anything, we usually appeal to something like, well, what caused that? What is the reason for that happening? So explanation, just trying to explain to each other uh, events in the world, we appeal to sometimes to the concept of causality or causation. Another important use of it is to predict the future. If we understand what caused something to happen, then we're in a better position to say, well, to predict uh, whether or not a future event is going to happen. If we know the things that precede those events, the things we've already identified as the causes, it makes our predictions possible. And finally, why predict? Because we want to usually manipulate the world around us. Think of like what causes a particular disease or symptoms. If we understood what causes it, then we might be able to do something about it to prevent a certain illness or a future event. So explanation, prediction, and manipulation all seem to rely on some understanding of causation. So that's one of the reasons why, those are the reasons why we might think of causation as an important topic, understanding what it is and how it works. And as far as, and this is next point that she makes, which is very good, I think, and this applies to many other concepts in philosophy besides causation, at least in analytic philosophy, but to some extent in all philosophy, is when you try to understand a concept is there's several options. If it's not obvious what it is, like what is causation, as it turns out, it's going to be kind of mysterious. We get into it. One of the ways to resolve the mystery of it is to reduce it to something more basic, more simple that we do understand. Reduction, in other words, is one strategy to analyze an idea. Another is to eliminate it. If it turns out that it's not really necessary, you can function pretty well without that concept. Because you find other mechanisms or other ways of thinking that don't require the concept of causation. That's one possibility. Another is that it doesn't reduce to anything and you can't eliminate it. A third option perhaps is to just assert that it's primitive. It's like a basic part of how we structure human experience. Something like space and time, for example. What is space? Well, it's not made of anything. It is a basic thing, at least under traditional views of the matter. So making it basic, reduction, elimination, making it primitive or basic, and just acknowledging that there's no further analysis of it. Another fourth possibility is that in the process of analyzing it, you learn that there's more than one thing that concept refers to, meaning there's more than one concept of it. And maybe one version of it works in this realm of experience and another one works in another. And the two are quite different from each other, yet they're both referred to often as by the same word as causes. It could be relevant to debates about free will and determinism, because under one conception of causal determinism, for example, is the idea that everything that happens is caused by something that happens before, and so on to the beginning of time, if there was a beginning. And that if this is true, then at least under one understanding of what of the world is, that then we don't have such a thing as free will. But there is an alternative view, and that's to suggest, well, there's a different kind of causation involved in free will. There's something called event causation, where a event in the physical natural world happens, which brings about another event in the physical natural world, and so on, that determines the events that follow, and they have to be that way because of what came before. And then there's another kind of causation called agent causation, and this is specifically saying that there are not all events in the world are causal. I mean, are event caused by events. Some of them are caused by special metaphysical entities that are agents, of which usually philosophers say that human beings are capable sometimes of acting and behaving like agents. We can bring about events in the world because of a very special metaphysical status. We're agents. We're not passive objects in the world that just get pushed around by whatever is in their environment. This gets into, but then you have to accept a kind of dualist conception of the universe, that there are events and there are agents, and there's two kinds of causation associated, one with each. And so part of the one resolution to the free will determinism debate says, well, they're both correct. There is a physical world in which events cause other events to happen in a deterministic way, and then there's another world in which certain kinds of things called agents can make things happen without themselves being forced to make those things happen. There is a leeway, a freedom there. Anyway, that's the reason that's a free will determinism problem. But causation, if there's more than one kind of causation, it relates to it. So again, to sum this up, one way, in other words, we could decide by analyzing the concept of causation that it's not a thing in itself, but it's comprised of more basic elements. That's reduction. David Hume, for example, we'll see in a moment, does something like that. Or it's an idea that we can learn to do without once we have a better understanding of the world. An example of that might be, I think there was a statistician in one of the articles they're in the long write-up, who argued that part of the philosophy of big data is that if we have enough data, information about the world, we can achieve all that we want to know about the world without needing to have any concept of causation. Correlation, in other words, is enough if you have enough data to work with. You can just dispense with the idea of causation. If it's too mysterious or we can't put our finger on what it is, do we really need it? This is the elimination idea. And finally, that you could also judge it to be a basic tool of human comprehension. Someone like Immanuel Kant uh, thought of it that way, along with time and space. Causation was one of those basic things that are kind of built into our tools that we use to structure the world, and it's basic. You can't reduce it to anything simpler. And finally, that last one again, in other words, is to accept that there are different kinds of causation, which may explain why we get confused thinking about it as just one thing, as in the free will determinism debate. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk about David Hume's the classic theory of causation, or sometimes called regularity theory, or RTC for short, the regularity theory of causation. But before I do that, maybe this is a good time to, anyone have any questions about what I've said so far, or any thoughts about this before I get into the theory?
No, I'm good to carry on.
Okay. So then we'll go into Hume. David Hume in the, I think, early 18th century, I believe, is famous, probably more famous for this than anything else, although he was certainly one of the most important philosophers of that period. Was an empiricist. Empiricist is someone who believed that all information that we get that ever comes into our minds comes in there from the outside world through our senses, along with John Locke and George Berkeley, also empiricists, though Hume is probably the most radical of the three. For Hume, there was just, we are nothing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Hume's metaphysics, because just to show how his causation figures into it. For Hume, he said what we are is bundles of perceptions. We are literally everything that enters our minds through one or another of our senses. We're like the other empiricists, we're blank slates when we're born. There's just nothing there, nothing built into us. Everything that ever enters our mind comes in from the outside. And we don't, so how does this apply to causation? Well, as a radical empiricist, he would say, well, what do we mean when we say that something causes event A causes event B? Do we see the causation? We see the event A followed by event B, and if you see it often enough, you can't help but begin to expect B to happen if you see A. And this is basically habit. We get conditioned by the world around us or by events around us, if they're regular, just to call the one that immediately precedes the second as being the cause, and the one that follows as being the event. And that's it. That's all we ever observe, this regularity, sometimes called constant conjunction. And that this is a reduction. He's basically saying that that's all that causation is. There's nothing else. This regularity plus our propensity to form habits. We don't observe causation directly. We just observe instance after instance, and if it happens often enough, we just can't help but assume the thing that comes first must be the cause of the thing that comes later. What he argues against is the idea that the sort of naive idea that he thought that many people have of necessary causation, that when we say that A brings about B, that somehow there's necessity in that bringing about. There's no necessity beyond what the habits we form by seeing the regularity again and again, very, very persistently. That in necessity for Hume, the only kind of necessity there was logical necessity, like, for example, deriving a conclusion from statements that are both true and you're not violating any basic laws of logic, like, for example, or to even a simple one, even simpler still, is a statement, and like, for example, how do you know that a bachelor is unmarried? Well, because it's part of the definition of being a bachelor that you're unmarried. That's logical necessity in its purest form. You don't need to go around asking bachelors, conducting surveys, are you married or not? That would be empirical research, because if they're married, they're not bachelors. And if they're bachelors, they're not married. That's the only kind of real necessity that it appeals to logical. That's logical necessity. But in the empirical world, the world around us, the world of events, physical events, or any other kind of events that we have information about, in that world there is no such thing as necessity or causal necessity. There's just different degrees of regularity. Some things just happen like almost every single time, perhaps every single time in our experience, that it happens that B follows A with that almost exceptionless regularity. And other things, there are exceptions, and some things are very hit and miss. And it doesn't solve anything to say that to dissolve causality into probabilities and saying, well, some things usually or often bring about others, but not always, say 90% of the time, because the probability just is another form of where does that come from? Again, Hume's going to say it's regularities. Not all regularities are not all or nothing. There could be degrees of them, but there's still regularities. You're never going to see like a causally something that responds to the concept of causation that isn't a regularity of events. That's in essence his theory, and it is. There are objections to it, but there are also responses to those objections. So before I get into some other theories, does anybody have any questions about that, or not clear about it, or?
Yeah, can I just ask Victor, so wouldn't probability just be a lack of data? So in
Mhm.
other words, if you had, like you said, if you had every single piece of data available in the universe, you wouldn't need probability because you would actually be able to say exactly what was going to happen.
Right. That would be an extreme, but literally impossible thing to pull off. But in theory, yes. And supposedly, for example, in theological arguments, the idea that God is omniscient, who knows if you knows everything, then of course he would know what's going to happen in the future since he knows it all. But we're never in that position. Um, the closest thing, okay, one closest thing to that humans get, and this is I'm sure going to come up later, is natural laws, and that is, what about the laws of physics that say, there are certain natural laws that seem pretty exceptionalist in the world. A physicist will tell you this is something violates a law of nature. There's probably a mistake. Someone's making a mistake. They're not. They don't. They want to say these law of for example, conservation of momentum, or things that are basic to physics. Um, they're taken to be laws, meaning they govern events in the universe. But the Humean response to that is to say, well, where do those laws come from? They come from near, or as close as we can come to near exceptionalist regularities, because they become so we're hard. It's hard for us to find exceptions to them. We kind of say we postulate them as hard and fast rules that shape the universe. But that's, again, where does that come from? It just comes from the fact that we don't observe exceptions to them. But that's all we ever see, the regularities. They could be extremely regular or not so extreme, but there's just a continuum of strength there, depending on how much regularity there is. There isn't something dramatically different about a law of nature that isn't true about an everyday observation, except the everyday observations tend not to be quite so hard and regular and fast and unshakable or unchangeable. But yeah, I guess if it were possible to have be omniscient and know about everything, all there is to know, and it seems that those are arguments that are used for example, for what's it called, often deal like the problem of evil in relation to like God. The problem of evil is that if God knows everything, is all powerful, all good, and omniscient, then he would know everything there is to know. He would, because he's omnibenevolent, he would want to do something about it if it was a bad thing. And because he's all powerful, he could do something about it. So how do you explain evil in the world? Um, that's a whole other question, but that's uh, uh, the omniscience in there, I think is important. If one of those things is not present, then there's a way in which evil could coexist with God. But it seems problematic for those three things to be true, and for there to be, and there are responses to this, but that's another discussion. Um, yeah, I don't know if
I've got a comment, Victor.
yeah,
So, I mean, when I studied Hume in college somewhat, and there's one kind of example that I always remember is like here's like take this magazine, and every time in the past that I dropped the magazine, it fell to the floor. But
yeah,
there's no guarantee that next time it will. There's just where's it written that next time
yeah,
it. So
yeah.
I
Well,
mean that kind of an example is.
yeah, I remember back in
And
some
then it was like, yeah, you're right. There's no guarantee. It is
yeah.
just
Well,
always in the past.
I remember being hearing that too in school, and some physicists would say, well, there's a very, very remote possibility, extremely remote, that all the atoms in that thing would move in the same direction at once, and that it wouldn't fall down; it would fall sideways or go up, But the probabilities against that happening are extreme. This,
Well, if you happen to be up in space, it wouldn't.
yeah,
But but I mean, okay.
yeah. Um, Yeah, but even yeah. Speaking of physics, there's as Marianne Talbot talks about there's in science as opposed to philosophy, as she points out, most scientists rarely question what about causality. They just assume it. They have an idea of what it is, what they're looking for. They look for data to support a hypothesis, and if they have enough data and enough what's it called, replication of an experiment, that's good enough for almost like, say, medical science looking for the cause of a disease. If you see a lot of data, you're not going to ask, well, what's causation? It's just this microbe is associated with this particular disorder with such regularity. We're going to call this the cause, and the disease that results from it to be the effect. And this is But it's rare that except maybe theoretical physicists, that they get deep into the concept of causation. Or the other group of people, which this is going to come up, by the way, in the next topic, are the neuroscientists and the psychologists who study how we think and why we think the way we do, or in trying to pin down what's going on in the brain. So theoretical physicists and neuroscientists and psychologists are the only scientists that really are interested in causation from a scientific point of view. The other sciences pretty much just say we know what counts as causation for our purposes anyway. They don't really get into the theory, but if you're delving into the human brain, or at the most abstract theoretical level, the whole universe, then it we're going to get to this at the very end of this talk, and that is an idea that has obsessed some philosophers and some physicists in recent times, and that's backward causation. Is it possible for a future event to bring about a past event? And by the way, part of before I go, somebody else has a question, but I think call-in user. But another part of Hume's definition of causation was he gave that it was just correlation. It's called the negative argument he made. He also had a positive suggestion about to describe or characterize causation. He said there's temporal priority in causation, meaning that cause Hume did, and most people in common sense would agree with him about this, that the cause always comes before the effect, right? At least traditionally. And he just says that's, if it doesn't come before the effect, then it's not the cause. But he just built it into the definition. The second thing is that there's spatial contiguity, meaning, and here this is a little fuzzier because he said that if there's no, he didn't believe in action at a distance, like something happening in another corner of the universe causing something to happen here. He was thinking of billiard balls, one of them striking another. The thing that caused the second billiard ball to move was the first one that hit it. So the cause has to have some kind of physical connection, even if it's momentary, with the thing that is the effect. Or the microbe, for example, if there's a bacteria or a virus that causes a disease, well, you have to have that virus or that microbe in your body for it to cause your disease. It can't be something existing in another planet or on another part of the globe. It's got to be at least pretty close to the effect, physical contiguity. And the third thing, what is the third thing? Let's see what is. Oh yeah. One event we're just. Okay, those two things, the temporal priority and spatial contiguity, are the things that he said we normally associate with causation. And there's a third thing, and this is the one he questioned, or at least analyzed or reduced to regularity, and that is necessary connection. Because that is the thing that is most controversial, because if without that, then you're talking correlation. Because that's how we want to distinguish causality from correlation, that somehow the causality or causation thing, whatever it is, makes necessary, causes the second event is brought about by something the first event does. It's not accidental, whereas correlations can be accidental. And that was part of the concept that as Hume understood it. However, he simply said there is no, that what the necessary connection amounts to is just regularity of experience plus our psychological propensity to form habits. That's what that necessary connection amounts to. Go ahead.
Let me ask you. I mean, so I thought the issue of necessary and sufficient conditions might determine causality. In other words, if you can elucidate all the necessary conditions, in order to, billiard ball, you have to make the first ball move. That's a necessary condition. But will that be a sufficient explanation, sufficient condition? But if you can elucidate all the necessary and all the sufficient conditions, which I think is impossible, then you will have a definite cause by elucidating all those factors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it certainly helps us, and also that they happen. But how do you determine necessary conditions or sufficient conditions if not through a regular, constant conjunction of seeing certain patterns happen again and again? Like, for example, fire never happens if there's no oxygen in the room. If you see that situations where there's no oxygen in the room, you say, well, oxygen is a necessary condition for a fire to happen. It's not sufficient because you need something else, but in combination with some other things, oxygen is necessary. And sufficient would be like, throwing a brick through a window, unless it's a very, very special kind of glass, is probably a sufficient condition to break it. It's not necessary, though. You could throw a chair or a person through a window, but a rock will probably do it.
But you need both to establish causality, I guess. But I don't think it's ever possible to elucidate all the. Right. If I shoot a billiard ball, well, how did I arrive at the pool halls? So you got a million causes to regress. How far back do you go?
Right.
So that raises another question, because, and this is, I think, germane to this discussion, is it's the level of explanation and the context of the explanation that can, at least we can agree, okay, in this realm, causality, or we can accept causality, and based on our definition and based on our criteria. For example, the old classical questions: what makes a tea sweet? Is it the sugar or the mixing? And some people say it's the mixing or the diffusion, and others will say it's the chemical element. And so you can sort of determine, based on the way you ask the question and what realm or level you want the analysis, sort of accept, we can agree on a causality, on a cause, within the realm of this discussion, but not take it to the nth degree and bring in so many different aspects.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's typically what happens in sciences. There's causation in geology, causation in biology is they have an understanding of what they're looking for if you're working within a realm of like looking for the cause of a disease, for example. They're not going to ask about the beginning of the universe to figure out what was causing an illness. There's a point at which they say we got enough information to answer the question for our purposes of what is the cause of this disease. So yeah, but philosophers sometimes want to know more abstractly, well, what is cause? And sometimes they refer to something called where if you really want to know the cause of every event, they don't even think of the universe as, literally all of it as being, every universe is composed of events. One event could be literally this entire state of the universe at a particular time. And the cause of that entire state of the universe is the entire state of the universe, one unit of time earlier, and so on and so on. So that you have the entire universe brings about every slice of time of the universe brings about the next one.
Yeah.
But that's not very enlightening for any human purpose we have, because we're always interested in things a little bit more, closer to everyday experience than the entire state of the universe, what causes it. Go ahead. I'm sorry, you were going to.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know if you read Carlos Castaneda's and Don Juan. There's a quick story where they're having an argument, and Don Juan makes a point, and Castaneda's makes a counterpoint, and all of a sudden a plane goes overhead and drowns out what Castaneda's is saying. And Don Juan is laughing his head off. You see, I'm right. The world agrees with me. It drowned out Carlos Castaneda's point. So everything that happened was for that specific purpose, to enhance Don Juan's argument. It's a beautiful story from that perspective.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions so far about? Yeah. Okay, I was talking about Hume, about his theory. To sum it up again, he thinks that causation is simply regularity. It's regularity of observation combined with our natural tendency to form habits. And why we have those tendencies, probably modern evolutionary biologists would say it's extremely helpful to our survival that we learn from seeing the same damn thing happen over and over again, because if we never learned, we wouldn't be here. So we were conditioned, like Pavlov's dog, to notice these patterns and to take them seriously, because if we don't, we just won't survive. But that's a functional understanding of, that's just the way what we know about ourselves. That doesn't really, that's consistent with there being nothing but correlation. We don't need actually to know the cause of something. It's enough if we have enough correlations to make us feel confident to act or behave in a way that is conducive to some interest we have. And this leads to one earlier I said that some people think that, well, we don't really need to the elimination analysis of causation, that we don't really need the concept. If we every day, what we really mean that they are saying is that everyday causation is a short shortcut to saying lots and lots of correlations and lots of information that makes us feel confident that we got a handle on things and we can act based upon that information. That's all we need from the concept of causation, and that's what, for practical purposes, we were going to call causation. Beyond that, something metaphysical, or we don't actually see the causation, its correlation is enough, if provided we have enough correlation, that is. That's one option. Let's see. But this is not the only theory of causation. In the 1970s or 60s, or yeah, it might have started in the 60s, there was another attempt to theorize about what causation is. And it turns out, in hindsight, after decades of people hashing it out, that this may not be that different from Hume's original theory, but especially since Hume himself, in the very passage where he talks about his theory, also gives another kind of explanation about causation. He says, A is the cause of B if, had A not happened, B wouldn't have happened. This is called the counterfactual theory of causation. It's trying to account for the sense that A was necessary for B to happen. If A doesn't happen, B doesn't happen. But is that theory for a long time raised a lot of dust, and people were saying, was this really different from what Hume was saying, or is it mistaken? And it turns out that there's lots of objections to this theory. I mean, some of the obvious ones are, or maybe they're obvious to us, but they might not have been obvious to the people who first thought it up, is that sometimes B might happen without A. There could be, as someone noticed, there could be multiple reasons why, multiple causes for something that you may, a window might break, for example, not for other reasons besides because somebody threw a brick through it. Moreover, it's possible that it still would have broken even if whatever you call the cause had not happened. And this, so the counterfactual understanding of what causation is it can be undermined by all kinds of imagined scenarios, and some of them aren't imagined; they're quite real. I'm going to give an example of I think an entertaining one or interesting one that's actually it's not a philosopher's thought experiment, but actually based on some real a real story, documented heavily. It comes from the philosophy of law, and there's a lot of aspects of this that actually would be interesting in a different topic on the philosophy of law, but it does relate to causation. This is a real case. You can Google it if you want. It's the name associated with the case is Dlugash. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct. It's spelled D-L-U-G-A-S-H. It's a famous case famous in the philosophy of law and also among philosophers because it challenged our understanding of how are we going to deal with a new, strikingly, what seemed to be our understandings of, in law, there's a precise or attempt to have a precise definition of what murder is. It is to intend to kill someone and to take action to bring it about. The first is sometimes called mens rea. It's a mental state. It's supposed to rule out accidental or negligent or other lesser serious motivations. But if you intend, and there's evidence that you intend to kill somebody, and you take action to bring it about, and the action you did would have killed a person, then you're guilty of murder. Well, there was the case I'm talking about happened in New York City in the 1970s. There were these three guys who were drinking, and they were in the apartment of one of them, and they were arguing with each other about something to do, some trivial thing to do with rent or something. At least two of them were armed and had weapons. I don't remember the exact names, but we'll call them A, B, and C, the three guys. They were all arguing in a room. C stepped out of the room to go to the next room, maybe to go to the bathroom or whatever. And while he was out of the room, A pulled a gun and shot and killed B. Okay. Shortly thereafter, C walked into the room, seeing B lying on the floor. He had a gun too, and shot B again in the head several times. So when this got to court, there was a straightforward case about what caused B's death. By the way, the medical expert said that what A did, the shots fired by A would have killed B instantly. He was dead. But C came in and shot him again. And the bullets that C put in his head would have killed him had he been alive. But the medical experts said no, he was quite dead when C shot him. And what the the charges against A were pretty straightforward. He killed B. Killed him dead. But the lawyers defending C tried to get, and they wanted to convict C of the same thing because both A and C were motivated. They both admitted they wanted to see dead. They intended to kill him, and they took action to kill B. And had B been alive, when in the case of C, what C did would have killed him. But he wasn't alive. He was dead. So his lawyers said, or tried to make the argument to the court that, well, my client didn't murder anybody. He desecrated a corpse, and that's a minor crime, and you can get it for that, but not for a murder. That didn't sit well with the judges and the jury. They wanted to get him for something much more serious than desecrating the corpse. But it's true, what he did not kill B. B was dead already. But they wanted. He did, but what C did fit the criteria of what it means to murder someone. He intended to kill. He took action to bring it about, and if luck had not intervened, or bad, I don't know which way the luck goes, he would have killed him. And by the way, C admitted he wanted to see him dead. Again, they were drinking, and C said he thought at the time that he shot B that B was moving, that he was alive. So he did not intend to desecrate a corpse. He intended to kill somebody, but in effect, it was impossible for him to kill him because he was dead. You can't kill someone twice.
Yeah.
So
there's some fiction which also hinges on that, including a James Bond novel that, basically the bullet that killed is different from the first bullet that appears, and based on that, it would have appeared like a suicide or whatnot. And
right.
Yeah, I mean, these things are possible. There's another crazy case of, I'm sure everybody has heard of him, John Wayne Gacy, who argued that he was not responsible for all the murders. The body is found under his house. It was his split persona or something, which, I mean, I don't remember the details, but he did say that the only thing he should have been charged of was running an unlicensed cemetery.
Yeah. Well, anyway, to get back to the case I was talking about, what the court was trying to determine is causality, but it was very clear who caused the death of B. It was A. Nevertheless, they wanted to punish C because his situation was identical to A's. He wanted to kill somebody. He took action to bring it about, and if luck had not intervened or bad luck had not intervened, he would have killed him. So why let C get off on a minor charge while you're going to pin murder on A? This kind of galled the legal experts. But how did they? So what happened was they dismissed the misdemeanor charge. They said, well, so instead, the prosecutor said, well, we can't get C for murder because he didn't kill anybody. He desecrated a corpse, but he somehow did something more serious than that. So what they attempted a charge of attempt. I mean, they charged him with attempted murder, okay? Because he didn't kill anybody, but he sure tried. But that was knocked down too, because can you attempt to do something impossible? it was impossible for C to kill B because he was already dead. So if I attempt to, and another from another court case, I think I even talked about this one a few meetups ago about somebody who tried to kill somebody with voodoo. He made an effigy of his victim, and he really believed in this. It wasn't that he was deceived. Yeah, let's say somebody wants to assassinate the president of the United States by creating an effigy of him and sticking pins in it. And the FBI finds out about this. Are they going to prosecute the guy for attempted assassination or not? Probably not, because at least in our culture, not. But this could be a culturally dependent thing, because we don't believe that you can kill somebody that way, even if the person who was trying to do it really believed it. But in the case of the C, what he was trying to do was literally impossible, and everybody agreed you can't kill a dead person again. So can you be charged with attempted murder if the thing you were trying to do wasn't possible in the first place? What happened was, if I recall correctly, is they did eventually agree to the attempted charge, but they kind of fudged a little bit. They said, what was the reasoning behind? And the courts do have to give a reason why the trial court ruled one way, the appeals court reversed it, and the court above that reversed it again. There was clearly a lot of confusion among the judges as to how to handle this case. And they were concerned because there's something called the impossibility defense. This is where someone who was accused of a crime that is impossible for them to commit their attorney can then say, well, you can't get my client because he was trying to do something impossible. And that was the case here, but they still wanted to get him for something serious. So basically, they focused not so much on what he actually did, but upon the situation and saying, well, what this guy did, even if he didn't succeed at doing it, was just something we want to deter. We don't want people to go around shooting at bodies that they think are alive, even if they're not. So we need to get this guy for something. So they did let the attempted murder charge go through for this guy, even though objectively what he did is no different from what A did. He believed at the time he shot the guy that he was alive, so he intended to kill him, and he took action to kill him, and yet they were charged with different crimes. And this was a puzzle. Well, anyway, the way this relates to the causation thing is that B would be dead even if what A did had not brought about the death, because what what C did would have killed him. So it's like two people throwing a rock at the same window, but one's rock hits the window first. So that person, getting back to the counterfactual theory of causation, if that first person's rock had not broken the window still would have broken because of the second rock that somebody else threw. So the idea that counterfactual causation, that causation can be analyzed in terms of, well, A causes B. If had A not happened, B would not have happened. But it's very possible B would have happened anyway because of something else. So that understanding of causation did not last too long, and it's kind of passé these days, but it was a thought. Does anybody have any questions about this so far before I move on?
I think this situation comes up almost every day. You get into a car accident, you're inebriated, and you hit somebody. And then the charge depends on the results. If the person goes to the hospital, his life is dependent on, so close to death. And if he dies, you get charged with, I think, was it negligent homicide? And if not, you should at least be charged with attempted negligent homicide. So that's a daily occurrence almost.
Yeah. It's also related to another topic we talked about a few years ago called moral luck. This has to do with Like a easy example of this is two people who are driving home at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're drunk from a bar. They're headed home, and one of them drives up on the curb temporarily, hits a bush, gets off back on the road, heads home. That's the end of the story. Nothing happens. The other one, exactly same situation, except he doesn't hit a bush. He hits and kills a person. Both are equally in the same situation, but one of them was very lucky and is going to get off easily compared to the other one. In what sense is one more guilty or culpable than the other? It seems pure luck between the two. But that's a kind of a moral question. Dominic, you have your hand up?
Yeah, good evening. Thanks for letting me speak. I came in a bit late, and thanks for hosting. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So I was just wondering, my question to you, the first incident that you described with ABC, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would it make sense by all means? I haven't thought that through, so it's actually just really a question. If we say that the current state of the universe today would be that B would be dead, right? Because A was shooting and C was shooting, right? If I got the letters right.
Yeah, but not at the same time. One first and the other.
Yeah, exactly, right? So the whole point is that C came back into the room and shot again, but B was already a dead corpse, effectively.
Yes.
But since we know that by today, one or the other way, we would be in the state of B being dead, A and C have sort of this is the thing in your video with the overdeterminism, right? Mm-hmm. So they both take a share in having overdetermined the state of the universe where B is dead. So they take both a share in that. And because if A wouldn't have killed him, C would have, and the other way around. So in that sense, they could have taken the sentence that was given to A, and 50% of the share should have been given to C. So let's say A got 20 years and C got 5 years, but then you have to give a share of the 20 years to C because both contributed to overdeterministically to the state of the universe that B is dead.
Yeah. Well, that sounds illogical, but it's not actually the way law works. I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, more like as a thought experiment for the sake of discussion and causation.
Right.
Would you say, yeah, it's not how law works, and there's all this, but what do you think in terms of do they kind of both share causal? Don't know. Maybe can bring in probability, but both have contributed to the height of probability, to the amount of probability that C would be dead by today, right? Mm-hmm. They both have some share in that.
Yeah. Well, actually, maybe what you're saying, at least unconsciously, they didn't say this explicitly in the decisions, but maybe this is what motivated the courts finally to agree to accept the charge of attempted murder on C, even though what he did was exactly the same as what A did, who did murder B, because they were thinking about the larger question of not specifically C, but the way the world, C did something that was a bad thing in combination with A, and between the two of them, they made the world a really bad place where if one person doesn't kill you, the other one does. So they were, maybe unconsciously, they were thinking they had to they needed to put some serious blame on C, even though purely logically, the way murder is defined, it's your acts have to kill the victim, and you have to intend it. It's not enough that pure accidents got involved in that. And the excuse that C's lawyer gave that, well, he was just, he didn't kill anybody at all. His actions, he tried to, but he didn't succeed, is what his lawyers tried to say. The reason they dismissed that rationale may have to do with what you're saying, a sense of feeling that there was a serious wrong done by C that's more serious than just desecrating a corpse. And somehow we need to take that into account in our judgment. I'm guessing.
Thinking,
go ahead.
That in insurance, there's this concept of subrogation, right? And especially in accidents. I mean, basically, sometimes it may not be worth the while to get at the quote root cause of things, and you can just apportion blame. Like I know in Paris, there are certain places where literally the insurance agencies, they don't even like do an investigation. It's by fiat, it's 50-50. It's just, what's that famous roundabout where Arc de Triomphe is? For those types of things, that may be okay. But if the stakes are high, then, for nuclear war or there was a famous case, I believe it was in the UK in the 19th century of these three people who were shipwrecked and they ended up resorting to cannibalism.
Yeah.
And so there was a precedent set. I mean, when the crime is, taking the life of another person, then you can't just, wash away something like that, even if there are extenuating circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the insurance, for example, there's something called, strict liability, which is where there's a famous case involving a dynamite factory that was a little too close to a residential area and it exploded and it killed a lot of people in the neighborhood. And there was no explicit wrongdoing involved, but a serious accident happened, and the courts decided they couldn't pin the blame on anything the dynamite factory was doing specifically, except for the fact that they were there so close to a residential area, and they decided to hold them responsible without asking, like, what did they do wrong? They said, just because you're engaging in some activity that is potentially, one can imagine, being very dangerous, there's an obligation on you to take special precautions to do what you're doing far away from where an accident like this could happen again. So they found him guilty and liable, even though they couldn't pinpoint any one single thing they did that was wrong. At the time, they weren't breaking any laws. After that, it caused some laws like zoning laws to happen to make sure that people doing especially dangerous things take extra precautions to prevent that kind of situation. So yeah, it's a kind of a utilitarian understanding of how law happens. But in murder cases, though, utilitarianism rarely comes up, because it's more like you want to punish the person taking into account their mental state at the time. Otherwise, you get there's a hierarchy of seriousness among murders. I mean, not murders, but killings, from manslaughter to second-degree murder and so on, all the way up to murder and aggravated murder, where the higher up you go on there, the more serious the crime is, the more steep the penalty is. And they do this because they feel that a lot of people, negligence and what's the other one? Negligence and recklessness are lower levels of guilt than intentional committing of a crime, and they want the punishment to match that level of guilt. But they have to look into the individual state of mind of the alleged perpetrator. It's not, so they do have to get into the details of that person's situation, as opposed to a blanket assessment of, like, a corporation's responsibility, for example, where no single person was involved. You can't put the finger on any one person. So you put it on a whole large group of people, the corporation. And the thing is about punishing corporations is the law only permits material punishment. You don't put these people in jail, you fine them. And that depending on the seriousness of it, that can be controversial about why not put some people in jail, even if they're corporate criminals. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion anyway. Any other questions?
If I pray for somebody's death, like some politicians,
yeah,
in a very specific way, is that attempted murder?
It depends on the culture. Probably not in our culture. But there was something similar to that when I talked about the voodoo case. In fact, this was a discussion several to go about a different situation. I forget about it, but this is actually a real case too. It happened in Florida involving this, for those of you who weren't here, involving some immigrants from Haiti who were living in Florida. And I may get some of the details wrong, but one of them, let's see, I forget the circumstances exactly, but there was a dispute between two people, and I forget what the cause of it was. They were all Haitians, and they all were believers in voodoo and being able to kill somebody through creating various spells or rituals. They would go through it. And one of them threatened the other by putting a curse or a hex on him. It threatened him his life. And to stop him, let's say, call that one who did the original threat A, and the one he was threatening was B. B, taking seriously the threat, killed A before, and it sort of to avoid being killed by this curse. Well, that's considered a murder in our culture. We don't accept that someone threatening you with a voodoo killing, someone threatens you with a gun, we can understand that. But if they threaten to kill you by like praying that you die or something, we probably don't take that too seriously. And so they didn't, at least initially they didn't. They found B guilty of murder or homicide, even though he genuinely believed his life was threatened. His lawyer said it was a case of self-defense, but self-defense against a voodoo threat just didn't fly, at least initially. Well, that was the initial case, but then what happened over time is that within a very short time, his sister, the person who was accused and sentenced to be punished for having killed the person he thought was threatening him by a voodoo, his sister committed suicide in distress because she felt that her brother was unjustly being punished. And then a year later, the lawyer that represented them initially committed suicide. And then one of the witnesses within a year also died. After about 2 or 3 years of this, the authorities started thinking otherwise. These are not believers in voodoo. There are people that are in our culture. They started having second thoughts about this. It's not that they became believers in voodoo, but what they did is they eventually lightened the sentence and let the guy they initially convicted of murder to get off early. And the reasons they gave were, well, there were informal reasons. They said, well, there's just enough people dying in this case. We need to, stop this. But of course, none of them believed or confessed to believing in this. But must have been some psychological concerns here, that they were starting to notice a pattern of everybody who was associated with this case was dying mysteriously. And they thought they needed to stop this. And it's just a bit of superstition in our culture, but maybe it wasn't in theirs. Anyway, Mike and then Dominic. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. I missed what overdeterminism means. I think I know, but it sounds impossible.
Yeah. No, well, it's where something will happen. Okay, something's going to happen. If A doesn't make it happen, B will. It's like 10 people are aiming guns at you, or like an example of this would be a firing squad. If a bunch of people pointed guns at you, if one of them doesn't kill you, surely the others will. So it's overly determined that you'll die in that case. Anyway, that's my
But only in this case, the only one bullet is the cause. So
if that's true, if there are only one bullet gun is loaded.
if that happened to be true.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't really be overdetermined, though.
Well, overdetermined means that if one thing doesn't do it, another thing's going to do it, and if that doesn't do it, or perhaps even more things.
Okay.
It's
built into it. Okay.
It's built into it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Dominic, go ahead, and then Mike.
Yeah, I wonder in the case of the voodoo, right? So, isn't it surprising that initially they, only because the judges didn't believe in voodoo, only for that reason, they gave him the sentence from a perspective of what we believe in the Western world, right?
Yes.
But even in cases where a person has some kind of mental condition that gets diagnosed, then the sentence is somewhat weakened, right? Because they say, let's say they were schizophrenic or whatever, they had some mental condition. So I wonder, shouldn't have this fallen under the same? If it's, shouldn't there be some kind of qualification whether that person truly believes in voodoo? You know, through an interview, there would be an extra session, there would be experts doing some therapeutic sessions or whatever. Some psychoanalysts would talk to him, and then they would say, well, does this person truly believe what they say? Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, they are in a mindset that is in the same way like people committing crimes who had a hard childhood and where the parents were already killers, you know, this usually also influences how heavy the sentence is. Right. So I wonder, why did that not apply in that case?
No, actually, I think that the defense of the guy who was accused of killing somebody else in self-defense because he believed he was being his life was being threatened, you know, via voodoo, did try to bring in experts, cultural experts into the courtroom to try to convince the people that this guy was not making up the story. He really believed his life was threatened, and he, you know, his background and everything, they went through that. It's just that in our culture, that did not convince the judges and jury that that was a real, that he was really being threatened in this way, at least not initially. In fact, they never confessed that no one ever said, I've been converted to voodoo. It's just their behavior after this, after several years of people dying like flies and around the case, they started to behave differently, as though they were, you know, having second thoughts. But initially they just rejected the possibility, because they would say, look, you know, if someone threatened the president with assassination via voodoo and somebody informed the FBI about it, would the FBI take it seriously? Well, they would investigate, I'm sure, but if they found out that this was all the person did, just create a doll that looked like Donald Trump and stuck pins in it or whatever, that wouldn't count as attempted assassination. If he did something else like stockpile rifles and guns and had plans to do this, that would be different. But you're right that in most legal cases, the defense would certainly try to convince the jury that this guy was sincere in his belief that his life was threatened, and by all accounts, he was. But it just did not work in that time, in that culture, in that place, at least not initially. And what was interesting is how this seemed to change as more mysterious deaths started to happen around there. That doesn't prove voodoo, but it did rattle the people involved, it seems.
But in terms of causation, I wonder if that means that even what an individual is doing, who has a certain degree of agency, but only a certain degree of agency. So it seems that even if you say, well, they're less guilty for their actions because there's somewhat external causes. In a sense, the causes is, they're extremely traumatic. Their ability to make use of free will is limited because they're heavily traumatized, and it's like they have a program in their head that is limiting. And therefore, in the stream of causation, say, there's actually factors which are in a sense external to the person, because they're like having been, this trauma is like forwarding past events through the person. So in a sense, I think we all are. I mean, the question is, whatever we do, are we actually if we act out of free will, is that really then the ultimate source of causation if I decide to drink the tea? Or is that because I've always been drinking tea with my parents when I was little, and all I'm doing is following the program? Mm-hmm. And then suddenly the causal chain is not, I'm not the first mover here, but the first mover is further downstream, because what my parents did to me. So But then you have to determine between, are my actions influenced by the program, or is it truly free will or not?
Right. Well, what you're discussing actually is the free will determinism problem, which we've talked about in the past. And this time we're talking about causation, mainly about causation, although it does connect up with free will and determinism. And that's why I brought up this case. But yeah, there's a lot of there is a theory of one, as I mentioned earlier, there's more than one understanding of what causation. There's something called mental causation or agent causation, as I was saying earlier. Then there's the causation that is studied by the sciences, which is impersonal events in the world, like what causes an earthquake, for example. It's not someone's free will involved in there. It's natural forces. That there's one conception of causation is that it's events that cause other events. Another one is it's a theoretical position that there is such a thing as mental causation, where an individual brings about it, not always, but it can certainly coexist with the idea that our brains and our past behavior, our genetics, all that has a contribution to make to our behavior. But sometimes the theory goes, it is up to us to make a decision, and we're not determined to behave in whatever way we're going to behave by past events. That's a theory. Now, that's largely in defense of the free will side of the debate. But yeah, I want to take one more question about this, and then I'll move on to the next part of this discussion on causation. Go ahead, Colin User. I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just thinking there's a concept of Jean-Luc Lyotard, if I remember his name correctly. Maybe it was Jean Lyotard, the French thinker. He calls it differend, diffferend, and it's something like there might be some aspect of a situation which cannot be captured, or some way of thinking, or some form of grievance which simply cannot be recorded or captured, or cannot enter the system, the judicial system, for instance. But that is not to say that the crime, the enormity of it was not apparent to everyone. And his example was that of the Holocaust. I mean, that's just the example he uses, but can apply to many other things, like colonial massacres, in which you only have written record from one side, or Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Colombian author, he used that technique of magical realism to depict the massacre of the banana plantation workers, because he had to do that, otherwise there wouldn't be any other, like it would all appear as justified, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I wonder if that idea of different might have a role to play here.
A different what did you say? Deferral? What were you
saying?
This
is a French term that Lyotard uses, different.
Yeah.
And I'm mispronouncing it, but yeah, his idea is that there's a gap between what can actually be entered in the ratiocination of the court. For instance, voodoo is simply out of court. Like, I mean, they are not even going to consider it, but for these people, it may be a real thing.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm going to move on now to the next part of this discussion. So far, I talked about Hume's original regularity theory, and we were talking now about how the counterfactual. There's a lot more to say about all these theories, by the way. I'm just barely skimming the surface, but if you want to, I recommend you listen to the lectures by Marianne Talbot, and there's more stuff in the write-up. But there's another theory that's counter that basically disagrees with Hume in his analysis about causation, that it's ultimately just regularity. And that's something called the STC, or what's it called? The singularity theory of causation. For centuries now, since Hume, the dominant Hume's view, or something like Hume's view, has been the dominant picture understanding of causality. But there are philosophers who simply disagree with this. They think that no, you can have the experience of seeing causation happen. One philosopher, I think Elizabeth Anscombe, once said that you can have when you take a knife and you slice a fresh loaf of bread, you experience the feeling that you are causing that loaf of bread to be sliced. There is something you're having, an experience of causation. And in many other aspects of life, that it's not reducible to one event happening after another with regularity. It's an actual experience people can have of feeling causally enabled, that they're bringing about something into being. And that also you see sometimes events that don't involve people, but you see the billiard ball striking the other billiard ball, and you have the experience of that is cause. That this idea is that causality is not reducible, but it's a thing in itself, an experience we have. And the role that correlations play is to provide evidence for that, the validity of that experience. So yeah, of course, so the idea here is that you experience causation, you see it happening when you're involved in the case of it, and then yeah, correlation plays a role, but it plays an evidentiary role after the fact. After you've had the experience, then if you start seeing it with regularity, that provides evidence that your experience, it validates your experience, but you are experiencing something called causation. This is an alternative theory to Hume's. It's called the singularity, because it says that you don't need to witness a lot of events and pick up habits, and that's how you develop causation. You can have a single event can inform you. You can witness a case of causation from a single event. And the purpose of correlations is just to back it up. If you need convincing, for example, that it wasn't coincidence. But causation can be an experience in and of itself. It's not reducible to correlations. This is another theory that has been, I think this theory has more to do with psychological experiences. We definitely have experiences where we're sure we're having, where it's not just what we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. We're having an experience that's beyond just the empirical, about in that Humean standard way of empirical, meaning it's got to come through your senses, that the experience of causation is a real thing in and of itself. And if that's the case, if there is such a thing as causation, it's an experience, then that would make it a project for science, because it's an experience. Psychology, neuroscience, for example, is in the business of trying to understand experiences. And if they identify something that matches up with what we just described, then that's a project for the sciences, the psychological and neurosciences, to discover or not discover. It's an empirical question. It's not for philosophers to sit in their armchair and speculate about. It's either a thing or it's not a thing in the world, and it's an object for science to investigate. But the bottom line is that it could be a thing that is not reducible to correlations, as Hume's analysis suggested it was or is. Yeah, and does anybody have any, does anyone feel that they've ever experienced causation and it's not a matter of just a habit you picked up, but you feel it in the same way that you might feel certain about something? Or is that no one?
Can you clarify the question?
Okay, the question is, has anyone, I'm asking anybody here, ever felt that or do you feel that causation is not just a matter of correlation, of seeing that something happen a bunch of times and developing a habit, that it's more than that? It's like an experience. You see something happening, or you do something yourself, and you feel this is I'm causing this to happen, or that thing over there, that event is causing the other one. It's not just that I've seen that happen before 1,000 times, that it's an actual experience. That's the theory of STCs, the singularity theory of causation. It's a competitor to the regularity theory that Hume and many others have adopted. It's appealing to a thing, an experience that some people sometimes think they have. Does that help, or you don't know you've never had such an experience before?
Is there any example which elucidates that theory?
Elizabeth Anscombe suggested that she said it's self-evident. Sometimes, not always, of course. Sometimes we feel we're being pushed that way and that way by circumstances that we don't assert our agency. But the theory says that sometimes we know that either we or something else out there or someone else is bringing about something, and it's an experience, and it's not reducible to correlation. Well, the example she gave, slicing up, but it could be anything. It could be you choosing to join this meetup, for example. Was that determined at the Big Bang or by evolutionary biology that made it happen, or did you have an experience of having done this yourself? Darlene, I'm going to let Darlene, then Con, then call-in user. Do you want to say something, Darlene?
This might sound superstitious, but I like ever since I was a kid, I always attract animals to me. And it could be because I have a high-pitched voice, but there have been times where animals come to me and I haven't actually made any sound. So ever since I was a kid, I kind of thought that it's because I have this Irish heritage and I just have good luck, and it's superstitious, but it's constant.
Mm. Mm. Well, and are you saying that you are, or are you just noticing a pattern, or are you saying you bring about the pattern of these animals? You're doing something to attract them on purpose. Is that what
I guess in my mind I was thinking that maybe my spirit was attracting them because I'm really kind, and maybe the animals can sense that, or maybe I have a lot of really kind like angel guardians around me, like my ancient ancestors are hanging around me, which I don't know if what I do or don't believe, but if that's the case, they could be attracting them to me. I don't know.
Okay. Well, even if that is true, that would still be a case of, if it happens very frequently, it's a case of correlation. It fits in with Hume. Hume's idea is not just that correlation defines cause in the physical world, all cause, even if it's God causing things, or a ghost or spirits. If you have an experience of a spirit now and a moment later something happens, and this happens with great regularity, that fits in with Hume's theory, that's where you pick up the sense that original event, the spirit is bringing about this other event, it fits in with Hume's theory. What I'm talking about now, though, is something different, where it's more of a phenomenological thing, of something that in the moment when you're doing something, you feel strongly that you are experiencing what it means to cause or bring about something, or you observe something out there. It could be objects or other people doing this, bringing about something, making it happen, and you don't reduce that to just, well, it's correlation, one thing happening after another. You don't reduce it that way. You experience it as an experience. That's what I'm talking about right now. Con the Stoner, you haven't spoken yet. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I think at least on, it might sound fairly mild or whatever, but I mean, like, I'd say we kind of all experience this on a regular basis, like this, and like, so I have a switchblade, right? And so, like, me pressing the button.
Are you there? It looks like you went out. You froze.
Yeah, it froze on my screen. Oh, wait, it came back.
Are you there, Con the Stoner? I hear you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So it seems like we all kind of experience this on a regular basis, like this sort of like, I mean, at least on fairly mild ways, right? Like so like the example I just used, I don't know if you got it, but like I have a switchblade, so I press the button and the blade pops out. Like that's like me causing that, right? By pressing the button. Or like, you know, you open a door, you turn the doorknob and push the door in, and that causes the door to open. Like, you know, these are like, you know, pretty basic things that you cause. Now there are a lot of other causes that go into that, right? You know, going into like determinism and stuff like that, which you brought up. But like, you know, at least on a fairly mild way, there, you know, that's pretty evident that it is a cause because that's just how these things are designed. Like, you know,
Mhm.
um, so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Before let the next person talk, there is maybe what's going on here is, okay, Hume was an empiricist, so he wanted to reduce everything to what basically a sense experience, one from our conventional five senses: taste, touch, smell, taste, whatever, sight, and all the information that ever gets into our head, according to him and to empiricists, comes in via one of those routes. There's no, your feelings or how you feel about something, if it isn't one of those, to an empiricist is not considered a source of information. Okay. Now, there are philosophers who disagree with that. The phenomenologists, for example, would say, no, how you feel about something is another, whether or not it correlates to anything in the objective world. How you feel, your subjective feelings are as real as any objective one, and they need to be taken into account in trying to understand the world. That's where, say, phenomenology and empiricism are different. One just says it can't be studied objectively in the laboratory by a scientist, and it's not important. But phenomenologists would say no, at least half of experience isn't of that kind. It's how you subjectively feel the situation, and maybe that's what you're talking about. So, I mean, maybe that's what the singularity theory is referring to. It says when we think we experience, maybe we do. We're having experiences of making something happen or observing someone else make something happen. Anyway, okay, there's 3 hands up. I forget it. Does anyone know who the next person is? Dominic, Mike, or Colin User? Who's the
I
next
think
person?
Colin User, that's
Sam, by
Sam.
the
I
way.
think he was, yeah.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Sam, by the way. So, well, I mean, there have been cases of people like, who were about to board a plane for the very first time, and they had never flown before, so they had no, like history of experiences to compare that experience with, and they claim that, yeah, I just felt bad and I just missed that flight and that plane crashed.
Mm-hmm.
So is that a case of, them, like, had they never heard of a plane crashing, would they still have done that? So the question is, maybe it wasn't their own personal experience. Maybe they were extrapolating from that of others. And yeah, I tend towards Hume's view that other than purely random occurrences, you need to have a long stretch of experiences, even if they're not necessarily your own. They could be imprinted in your genes, or you could have heard about them through the newspaper, TV news, or whatever. But yeah, without any notion of experience, it's going to be a completely toss-up, meaning there's no, rhyme or reason to it.
Okay, so you're a humist, I guess, or a follower of Hume. Dominic, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, interesting question to ask, especially because it seems so obvious to us, right, that we cause things in the world. And so I like the question. Let's drill into that, and ask this again, I mean, in terms of your main question, when did I feel like, actually causing something, is usually when someone blamed me then later or held me accountable for it, So I once cleaned windows in a building, and I wasn't supposed to clean them in the way I did, and I actually smeared more dirt on the windows than cleaning, so I did more harm than good, and someone held me accountable for that. And I was pretty well, it was me, I was guilty as charged, sort of. So, but in a more in a sense, if we caused something, we can be sure that we did if there's some kind of feedback, right? And I don't mean just anecdotal feedback, like I said, some people approach you, hold you accountable, but if there's some kind of feedback from the universe into which we invest energy, does something come back? Even when I slam the door, I hear the door shut, and I hear the sound of it, and I have some shattering, and I feel that resonance, right? So there's a feedback of my action, and I think this confirms to us in the real macroscopic world that something happened, right? Mm-hmm. And that would bring me to the question. I'm looking at my talk time here, but would bring me to the question: what actually comprises an event, right? Yeah. When is an event? When does it start? When does it begin? And that is a very human thinking. If I drop the glass and it breaks, right, look at the result, and then the event ends. But usually I don't talk about the way when it was 60 centimeters away from the ground, and then 30 centimeters, and then 10 centimeters. I don't talk about that. I just talk about, I dropped the glass, then it broke, and this is how I speak in the human realm about events and when they begin and end. Right. And that's definitely a human experience, This is
right. Yeah, thanks a lot, Dominic. You raised some interesting points there. One is about let's see, what was it? Okay, the one you just said about, how do we demark events? One event causing another. From a physics point of view, there's a continuum. There's just one stream of things. We chop it up a certain way to say this because it's important or significant to some purpose or meaning or agenda that we have, to say this is an event that I'm concerned about, and this other event over here that I think was caused by the first event. Well, who decided where to draw the line about these events? And that, if that's subjective, it's not coming from the objective world. The objective world is one continuous stream of stuff. It's not even one thing happening after another, because there aren't even things to distinguish, except insofar as we distinguish them and say, this is a thing, that's a thing, this is an event, and I'm interested in the relations between them. But all this is very human, can be traced back to our need to organize the world a certain way. It's not that the world is already organized that way.
Can I hearken one more thing? Just really quick, is also if you look at relativity, whether an event is concluded or not is relative, because we know from Einstein that there is no universal now. Right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the event from someone, there is an observer out there where the glass that shattered from our perspective is still falling. Mm-hmm. So the event hasn't even finished.
Yeah.
So, and it's very real, and that is not a human experience, actually. This is what we know from relativity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If relativity is the best model that we have at the moment, but it seems to be well confirmed.
All right. Mike, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Yeah. I guess I don't find experience to be a good counter argument to regularity theory. To me, okay, just because so I'm playing football, I block somebody, they fall down. It's still correlation. Yeah, I mean, I caused that, but I don't see how that's materially different, the fact that I'm feeling something, than Hume's argument that it's just a habit. But to me, the thing about, I guess I don't really like the regularity theory of Hume. We induce habits based upon a finite set of experiences, because you can only have so many experiences, that there's a fixed set. And then you use, according to this, here's Hume's theory, you use these habits from your finite set of cases to predict the next event. But, okay, the problem with his theory, which is the same thing that infects AI, what if you get a much different scenario where you've got your finite set of experiences and you've got something else that happens? It's not really in your set of finite experiences. How do you apply, how do the habits transfer from your experiences to the new case? And I didn't come up with a good example. I didn't really have time to think of one, but there's got to be one cases. So to me, that's the main problem with Hume's theory. What if you get some kind of case where your past experiences don't apply? And when he's calling these things habit, I don't he could just say law too. We learn laws, but he uses habits because it conjures up this notion that it's just a human habit, but Humean habit maybe. But so do you follow my point?
Yeah, well, yeah. How do we process novel events that don't
Exactly.
for which we don't
And
have?
that's the defect of his
Yeah.
entire
Well,
structure.
I think Hume or someone arguing from his point of view would say that, well, if it's truly novel, we don't really know what to make of it until we do have enough experience with it, and then we can
Well,
begin.
but okay, but we find that these what he's calling habits, which are really more like laws, would work and apply.
Hmm.
AI is not that great. Present modern AI is not really that great at this either, because
Uh,
his work is
yeah,
correlation.
yeah.
If it's
Well,
faced with
well.
a novel case, it might not understand.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know.
Hmm.
I
Well,
can't think of a case right now.
actually, some other parts of Hume's theory have to do with how his theory of impressions and ideas, and his original idea is that we get it. This is the empiricist idea. We all our information comes through our senses. Those are he called them impressions, and then our mind processes them into we derive ideas, which are abstract things based upon those impressions. For example, I see I first time I experience a cat, I what preconception do I have of it? Well, like the closest thing, perhaps say a child who sees a cat for the first time, it has how does it process this experience? Well, maybe it's had a stuffed animal before, and this cat sort of looks like the stuffed animal. It uses the idea of similarity with previous experiences to the extent that helps it grasp new experiences. Similarity, in other words, is one of the ways it tries to grasp new novel experiences. If it doesn't never seen this before, it starts to conjure up, well, what does it sort of look like from stuff I have seen before? And if it doesn't, I'm not sure what he would say about something that doesn't resemble anything at all that you've experienced before. I think, except we would be completely stumped by that. But to the extent that we can see similarities in something new with something we already have experienced, we'll start with that and start building on that and start looking for more things to relate to some past experience we have and develop that way. But something truly, utterly novel, and from Hume's perspective, unless we had developed lots of experience with it, at least initially, we would be stumped by it. We wouldn't know what to make of it, at least on his theory. Anyway, these are all good questions, by the way. I think it's. I want to move on to some more interesting aspects of this. Okay, I talked about there are probably other theories out there, but I do want to, before we finish today, talk about the possibility or even just the idea of backward causation. And first of all, is it possible? And if it's possible, what does it mean? What other things? Because Hume, for one, specifically said, there was temporal priority in his understanding of causation. The cause has to happen before the effect. If it doesn't, then it's not causation. Whatever else it is, it's not causation. He just defined it as that's how it works. The idea that you could have effect at a future, something at an event at a future time, bringing about an event at a prior time, which is backward causation, was just ruled out from the start, from his understanding. And maybe that is the way it is for most of us most of the time. But starting, I think, in the 1950s, a few philosophers, and more recently, some physicists are starting to think more seriously about the possibility, because for one thing, from a physics point of view, the fundamental laws of the mathematics of the world, insofar as we understand it, are indifferent, neutral about the possibility. The future is mathematically no different from the past. They're all whatever fundamental physics laws there are out there, they work backwards and forwards. Are you leaving? Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. Um, um, so there's nothing in the physical world, at least the theoretical level, that rules out the possibility that a future event could bring about a prior event. So why would anyone think that this is possible, besides the mere possibility of it, that there's no physics that rules it out? Well, first of all, so in thinking about this, I started thinking about, I wanted to use this as an example or attempt, and I'm not sure this works, but I wanted an example to illustrate the possibility of backward causation that doesn't involve anything abstract or physics, anything from physics, because I'm not a physicist, but I have just a cursory understanding of modern physics and stuff. But there are concepts that we're all relatively familiar with that might suggest the possibility in a more everyday way of how backward causation might work. Okay, so I want to start with the idea of some things. Let me define very precisely some terms here, but they're ones we're all familiar with, like the concept of prediction, for example. When you make a prediction, like, you are necessarily making it about a future event. You're not making predictions about present or past events. That wouldn't be a prediction. Let's call it another term. Let's call it a report. If you're reporting on something happening right now or things that you have evidence for have happened in the past, that's a report. Reports can have truth values. They could be true or they could be false, but they're things that happen now or in the past. Predictions, on the other hand, are not about present or past events. They're supposedly about future events. And what I'm going to propose here is the possibility that predictions can never be true unless you accept the possibility of backward causation. Now, there is a way to avoid this, but it means saying that the predictions literally vanish into thin air when whatever event they're predicting, which I'm going to call the corroboration event. So I'll make a prediction now that so-and-so is going to win the next presidential election. Well, the prediction event is what I'm saying here and now. The corroboration event is what happens on November 5th or whatever. That is the event that's going to make supposedly my prediction true or false, whatever it is. So that's a future event. Okay. The idea is this, that predictions, because they're always about future events, are always about imaginary or hypothetical things. So they can never, they strictly speaking cannot have truth values because they're about things that haven't happened yet. They expect to be assigned a truth value when the corroboration event happens, that thing that makes it either true or false, but that event is in the future. Here's the simplest way about saying this. But so reports can have truth values because they're always about present or past events. Predictions, the claim is, don't have truth values and can't have them in the future either, because here's what's going to happen. When the corroboration event happens, it ceases to be a prediction. It becomes, if it's a report, the claim that, say, Harris is going to win the next presidential election. When the election comes about, I can't then say to say then at that time that my prediction was true is saying was true. That's a past tense event. It was never true until that moment. What happened is the prediction becomes a report on that at the moment the corroboration event happens. And so that event, that corroboration event, either one of two things: either it makes the prediction literally vanish because it doesn't make it true, it simply makes it irrelevant because now it's been replaced by a report, or you can speak loosely and say, or perhaps loosely, and say, no, the prediction is true, not was true, but is true when that corroboration event happens. But if so, that future event, the corroboration event, is the thing which caused a past event, the prediction event, to have the semantic truth value of being true. And that would be an instance of some future event bringing about a past event. That's if you accept the possibility of a true prediction. If you're willing to say, well, no, there's no backward causation, therefore there's no true predictions. What there is there is a prediction up until the corroboration event, then that prediction goes away. It doesn't get assigned a truth value. It becomes something else, a report, because now it's talking about what happened at that time, which is a truth, does have a truth value. So the idea here is basically that a future event, the corroboration event, which is usually the target of the prediction. Predictions, in other words, don't ever have truth values, either when they're made or at any point after. What happens at the moment that the corroboration event happens is they become reports, but they don't get assigned retroactively a truth value because they aren't predictions anymore. They're now reports on the state of affairs at that time. You don't make predictions about the moment or the past. You can only make them about the future. Now, tied up with this is there are different theories of time. There is, which we talked about in a past meetup, but there's something called the block. There's something called, at least three of the major ones, something called presentism, which is the idea that the past and future are not real. The here and now is all there is that's real. The past might be real in the future. The past was real, but is no longer. The future isn't yet. It's only here and now that is reality. That's one view of things. The other is the block theory, or the growing block theory, which says no, present and past events are real because anything you could say about them, or any statements are either true or false. We know what they are. We can, in theory, know whether something is true now or was true. But the future is non-existent. So it's called growing block because as time passes, the world of reality gets bigger. The world of which you could say things about that have truth values, the here and now and the past, gets bigger in theory. And finally, there's eternalist view, I think, which is a view that past, present, and future are always, they're all there. They're always there. So from that theory's perspective, backward causation is possible because future events are real, have the same metaphysical status as present and past events. So if something is very real in the future, why can't it bring about something here and it's at a time prior to it? Now, the first two theories don't permit that because there is no such thing as a future under those theories, presentism or growing block theory. But under eternalism, it is conceptually possible for a future event to bring about a past event. And these theories are held by different thinkers and defended and criticized and so on, but they're not, it's really, those are theories of time. And backward causation, the suggestion is here, would be possible in that third theory if there are in fact real future events. Why couldn't they work? Especially under Hume, the minimal view, not Hume's correlation, for example. Correlations don't have a backwards and forwards. Two things happen together, doesn't matter which one happens first. Correlation is indifferent to this order. Causation is, under Hume's definition, is not indifferent. The cause has to come first, then the effect. But under the correlation idea, there is no real difference between a cause and an effect. So why couldn't they switch places? I don't know, is this crazy or what do people think? I think I see two people, Colin User and Con the Stoner. Who was first, you know? Okay, Con the Stoner, go.
Yeah, so I tend to agree that there's no reason that time has to be like the one way or whatever, the way that we perceive it. Time is I would probably tend to subscribe to the eternalist view, as what you explained, right? I mean, the way I heard it explained is like time isn't real, it's just the way that we perceive the fourth dimension. So like imagine you have like a piece of paper like Flatland, right? Or a two-dimensional space, right? You go forward and backward, side to side. Now you put that piece of paper on a stack of papers and you draw a line up the side, right? Now from that two-dimensional space, we would perceive that line as different points in 2D space, but really it's just one continuous line in 3D space. So that's kind of the way that I view time in like 4D space. It's we perceive these things as different events in three-dimensional space, but really it's just one continuous thing in four-dimensional space. And so I think that, like certainly there's no, like I said, no reason that it has to work the one way. It's sort of, it's complicated and it's hard to think about because like, we're stuck perceiving it in our three-dimensional space or whatever. As far as I want to say to the prediction thing or whatever, I think that might be a bit of a fault of language, in that, because I see what you're saying about the prediction thing, but it seems to me that like that might be a flaw in our language, and that we don't have the right language to express. Because like you said, like if you say my prediction was right, then that's a past event, or you say it is right, then you're not really talking about a prediction. And so like, but that could be just like that we don't have the language to express it, right? That not necessarily meaning that predictions couldn't have a truth value, but that we don't have the language to express how they have a truth value, I guess, in that sort of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Khan the Stoner. Can I call you Khan? Is that okay? Or does it matter?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you
Okay.
just call me Khan, yeah.
Okay. Dominic, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, what I'm saying is probably along the lines of what Khan said, because again, if you bring in the relativity, and I think the 3-4 dimensional thing, I think there's this thing of Minkowski space. Basically, it's this whole thing about what do you do with time as the fourth dimension, all that. And when you draw this up, I think again, there will be some observers to whom this corroboration event has not occurred yet. You can always think of a observer who, for whom time, from their perspective, how time passes. And again, I'm not making this up. That's what we know from relativity, right? This whole thought experiment, but that's physically possible if you have one person leaving Earth and traveling for 5 minutes with almost speed of light. They come back, and on Earth already 5,000 years have passed, sort of thing. That can actually really happen by the laws of physics, due to relativity. By the same token, I would say that the truth value that seems to be really getting attached to the prediction, this one thesis that says, okay, there's something getting retrospectively attached. I think it's just a language problem, or is a problem of what concept of time are you applying. You can tackle this from both ways, and I believe that we have answers to that from already. Either you apply relativity, and then basically you end up with the same paradox whether a son can go travel back in time and kill the grandfather. I think it's the same question. I think the one with the corroboration event that you gave is the same grandfather. Can you kill your own grandfather? And then how were you actually born in the first place? And that gets usually, I think the answer to this is really, what's your concept of time there? And is that actually flawed? So I like that you raised that. It's great fun to talk about it, but my take on it would be that we actually already have answers to this. Either it's kind of a language game thing, you can tackle it from that side, I think, or you can draw from what you know from relativity and such to answer that. That would be my.
Dominic, when you say language game, what could you talk more about that? I mean, to review what I was saying is that prediction, it seems essential to the very concept of prediction that it is always about future events. It makes no sense to talk about predicting current or past events. So it's only a future-oriented concept. A report, I'm sort of specifying, is something you talk about that's here and now, or you have evidence for in the past. So so between the two, they cover all of time. Reports talk about now and past. Predictions are about the future. Reports obviously, if anything has a truth value, they do. I can say something now that's either true or false, or was about something in the past that was true or false. Talking about the future and being true and false, the only way that you can say something about the future that is true or false is through some eternalist understanding of time, that there already is a truth about the future and we haven't experienced it yet, but it's there. There is in metaphysics, we did talk briefly earlier about determinism or causal determinism, but there is an alternate understanding of future. It's not determinism, but and in fact, it's stronger than determinism. That's fatalism. And that's a logical argument, not a causal one. It simply says that if it is true, if it is whatever the truth is about the future, there is a truth about it, whether I know it or anybody knows it, or there's a God who knows it or not. It's a view that there are true statements or false statements about future events that may not be accessible to us. Why would someone believe that? Is partly related to an eternalist view of time, that there are true statements that describe the entire universe, going the present, the past, the future. They're essentially all the same. But our experience is limited to only where we're at now. An analogy that maybe help illustrate this. Imagine going on a train through the countryside and you're passing a bunch of villages. The past are all those villages you've already passed through. The present is the village you happen to be passing through now, but there are villages ahead, and they're ahead of you that you haven't passed through. They're already there. You will pass through them, but whether or not you have any experience of them or know anything about them, they're there just waiting to be experienced by you. This is a kind of mundane illustration of how eternalism would work. And so there is a whole world ahead of us that has truth values attached to every aspect of the universe, and we're just basically passing through it. And if that's the case, then all these events along this track from the past to the present and future all have equal status in terms of, and the fact that we're moving in one direction is contingent to us, but the train could have been going the other direction, and perhaps there is a train going in the other direction. And if so, the perspective of what happens in that world would look backwards to us, even though for people in that world, their future might be our past, and vice versa. But anyway, this is getting pretty abstract. I just wanted to bring up. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I respond to this? And then I know we have a speaker queuing, so I'll be mindful of that. But since you raised the question, my answer to that would, I believe, or my take on this, Victor, would be that in one hand you bring in when do we call prediction, and then does that truth or not? And then you bring in, there's these different models of understanding time and reality and how it, or if it even unfolds in the first place, right? But I think what we should do here is, the reality is that we humans, as you also actually said, have only limited ways of understanding reality day to day. Even if truly reality is made up in ways that we don't comprehend, maybe it's the other block universe or whatever version you described, but we have only one way of using language and talk about the idea of predictions, past, present, and future, because that's how we are as humans. If it and if let's say there was another observer was saying, well, actually the universe functions differently. It's not actually unfolding. All these events are already there. Well, then guess what? Then we are using the language in the wrong way, right? And this is why I mean that due to our limitations, we produce a certain language. We believe that in that language, and that again forms our beliefs of what reality is. And this is why it becomes a language. I say it becomes a language game, because we may be using it wrong because we don't have the capacity to create a language that is complex enough to encompass the fact that actually we live in an internal universe. So effectively these paradoxes actually come up because we don't have the capacity to even create the correct language that we should be using. Mm-hmm. And because we can't do this, we use language with at some points has these glitches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I understand your point, but I would say that the suggestion that we're using language wrongly or incorrectly is that judgment is coming from somewhere. From where? From us? I mean, it seems relative to the only judges of right or wrongness of how we use our language is us that we are aware of, assuming there's no. So I'm not sure what rightness or wrongness means in that context. I can understand maybe from a biological perspective that there are certain things that work and other things that don't work for our survival. And if we go around looking at the world one way, we're not going to make it survive very long, and another way works better. But that's a pragmatic. It's not a theoretical view. It's just about how we are, and that a judgment of rightness or wrongness from that perspective would be a judgment of whether it works or not for whatever purpose we have. But independent of those, is there a rightness or wrongness independent of those functional or arguments? I'm not sure what that would be.
If I may,
go ahead.
I think that there's certain things that language might have a hard time covering. Not necessarily that it's being used rightly or wrongly, but there's a word ineffable, right, which means cannot be explained in words or something. So it might not be that we're using language incorrectly or correctly. It could be that these are just things that language has a hard time expressing, that language just isn't set up to express the complexity of that maybe this is a bit ineffable, cannot be explained in words or something. So
okay.
Yeah, I did have a question, because I guess I was thinking more about this, predicting that you can't make predictions about the past. And I was thinking, what would you call something like if I said, I think I came on this group, I think it was about 3:30 when I came on this group. Right now, I don't know if it was exactly that time. It may have been a little later or a little earlier, but I guess there's no way to entirely confirm that, I guess. But is that, I guess, because that wouldn't be a report, and it's not about the future. So would that not be? But I guess, would that not be a prediction if I'm
I wouldn't call it. I would call it a speculation about the past, meaning that it's possible, perhaps you to confirm it or disconfirm it. In theory, whether you could do it or not, somebody could.
Right.
But or even but so it's an uncertain report because you're not for sure about whether it was true or false.
Okay.
But it still, in theory, has an answer, even if you don't know what the answer is.
But Victor, I think he's raising a good point, because in an eternalist universe, we should never ever talk about predictions, because actually predictions don't exist. There is no such thing as a prediction in an eternalist universe, because all future states, even if you take a fully deterministic, all the future states are decided already, then there is no such thing as a prediction. And then it's kind of ineffable to us as humans. We can't even think of that, because reality tells us that there's past, present, and future. So we create a word like prediction, not knowing that we are actually, assuming that the eternalist view is correct, live in a reality where all future states are already decided. So there is no such thing as a prediction in the first place. There's only reports. And in that sense, prediction and report is interchangeably used. And at that point, then, in fact, you have predictions or reports of the past and the future in the same way, because nothing matters. It's all was decided anyway.
Well, I think that from a human perspective, predictions would still function there, because we're not omniscient, or we don't know that the future might be spelled out in great detail. So in that objective, non-anthropocentric view, yeah, there's no such thing as predictions, but predictions are human tools for helping organize the world that we anticipate and hope or wish or expect because of our past experience. So it still has a human function, but you're right that objectively outside of, take humans out of the picture altogether, then yeah, predictions would mean nothing. It's just a human tool we use to help organize what our feelings about the future, whatever they could be, more or less corroborated by or supported by past experience, as Hume thought that we can only judge the future by what we know of the present and the past. But that's a very human limitation. Anyway, okay. Well, I think we're about to. Does anybody have any final comments? I think we're going to shut down for today. I'll mention briefly the next one I do online will be in October, and it's going to be on the mind-body problem, and an interesting recent development about it from a neuroscientist who has an interesting, pretty radical view about it. And there's some links there to watch in the meantime. They're pretty involved lectures, but I think they're accessible to most people. So we'll briefly talk about the historical problem raised by Descartes and the response even in his day from Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, who probably was the first person to recognize it as a problem. Descartes gave her an occasion to recognize it, but it was she who said there's a problem here. And then then we're going to shift the focus to the most current or one of the most current attempts to try to explain it. Okay, that's coming up in October, and I want to thank everybody who's here for having stayed here long enough. Okay. All right.
Can I ask a
Good.
question?
Okay. All right. Does anybody have any final comments before I just sign off?
Yeah, I wanted to say, so I there's this I guess this kind of general rule, like this saying that I like, that I think sort of relates to like the correlation and causation thing. One's an instance, two's a coincidence, three's a pattern. Which probably gets into the regularity of correlation, is like how consistent a correlation is increases the chances of it being causative. So like, one's an instance, two's a coincidence, three's a pattern. Just
Right.
kind of a general rule.
Yeah, and a million is a law.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. Okay. So thanks everybody.
Yep. Have a good night, you guys.
Okay, bye.